want to take you back to April 17th, 1970, to a small village called Connolly in County Sligo, Ireland. That afternoon, a 10-year-old girl named Bernadette Connolly said goodbye to her mother and rode off on her bicycle. And what happened to her over the next few hours is something investigators still can't fully explain. More than 50 years later, Bernadette had been sick for a few days and was only just getting back on her feet. Her mother, Maureen, asked her to run a quick errand pick up some smoked haddock and potatoes from a family friend named Eileen Malloy, who lived about 1.5 miles down the road. Now, in rural Ireland in 1970, this was completely normal. Kids rode off alone all the time, rode boats by themselves, sold things door to door. I don't think Bernadette's parents were careless. They just lived in a world where that kind of trust still made sense. Here's something I find really important, though. Bernadette's mother would later describe her as a very intelligent child, one she had specifically and repeatedly warned never to talk to strangers. And I think that detail matters a lot, because it suggests that whatever happened to her that afternoon, it probably didn't start with some stranger pulling up beside a scared little girl on an empty road. If Bernadette got into a vehicle at all, there's a real chance it was with someone she already knew and had no reason to fear. At 4:30, Bernadette pedaled off down the quiet country road. A woman named Kathleen Flynn and her 12-year-old son saw her not long after, and Bernadette waved as she passed them. That's the last confirmed sighting anyone ever had of her alive. By 6 o'clock, she still wasn't home, and she hadn't reached the Malloy house either. Her mother sent Bernadette's older sister, Anne, out to look for her. Anne and one of the Malloy daughters walked the exact route Bernadette would have taken, and behind an embankment near a local monastery, they found her bicycle. And right next to it was her purse, the coins for the fish and potatoes still sitting inside, untouched. Bernadette herself was nowhere to be seen. Now here's what's strange, and what investigators have never fully explained in over 50 years. The bike and the purse were placed almost perfectly, not thrown down in a panic, not knocked over in a struggle. They were set there, almost deliberately, the way you'd lean a bike against a wall before walking into a shop. If she'd been grabbed off the road by force, you'd expect the bike lying twisted in a ditch somewhere, maybe torn fabric on the handlebars from a struggle. There was none of that, and if she'd simply gotten into a car with someone she trusted, why leave the bike behind at all instead of just lifting it into the boot? It's one of those small details that just refuses to sit comfortably with any explanation, then or now. Anne ran home in a panic. Her mother immediately started calling hospitals, doctors, and the guard of the Irish police. Bernadette's father, Jerry, rushed to the spot where the bike was found and met officers already gathering there. A full search began that same night, spreading out from the embankment into the surrounding fields and lanes as darkness fell. Investigators lifted a single, unidentified fingerprint from the bicycle and spent weeks taking prints from hundreds of local men, hoping for a match. Witnesses came forward describing several unfamiliar cars in the area that day: a black Hillman Hunter, a white Ford Zephyr, a dark Ford Zephyr with a roof rack, a blue Ford Anglia. One sighting that stands out to me is a dark green van, similar to one used by the nearby Clunemahan Monastery for its milk deliveries. None of these vehicles were ever properly traced or ruled out, and to this day, nobody knows who was driving any of them. For nearly 4 months, the case went completely cold. No body, no solid leads, just a family waiting by the phone and a village that had gone quiet in a way it never had before. Then, on August 6, 1970, a woman named Margaret O'Connor was out digging turf at Limnaw Bog, roughly 15 miles from where Bernadette had disappeared. She'd noticed an unpleasant smell a couple of days earlier and brushed it off as a dead animal, the way you would out in the countryside. This time, she looked closer, and she found human remains lying in a bog drain. It was Bernadette. She was identified through her clothing and a set of religious medals she always wore around her neck. Her underclothes were missing, which led investigators to strongly suspect a sexual motive behind the abduction. Her shoes, her glasses, and a signet ring she always wore were never recovered, then or since. Because of how long her body had been exposed to the elements and the bog itself, an exact cause of death could never be determined. Her mother collapsed when when she heard the news and needed medical attention of her own. And that fingerprint on the bike, the one investigators had been treating as the case's best lead, it turned out to be nothing at all, a local man who'd handled the bicycle weeks earlier while helping his girlfriend borrow it, with a solid, verified alibi for the day Bernadette vanished. So the investigation was back to square one, and it would stay that way for the rest of the decade and the one after that. 3 names have circled this case for over 50 years, and I want to walk you through each of them because not one has ever been formally charged. The first is a monk from the nearby monastery, who I can only refer to as Brother X, since he's never been officially identified. A local garage owner insisted for years that he'd served Brother X at the pumps that very evening, impatiently honking his horn from behind the wheel of a dark green van matching the one seen near the disappearance. Brother X denied being there when he was first questioned. Decades later, cornered in an interview, he admitted he genuinely couldn't say for certain anymore whether he had been there or not. Bernadette's sister later claimed he had a reputation among locals for lurking around hospital wards, watching women undress, an allegation that's never been formally investigated but has never quite gone away either. The second name is a student priest named Father Columba Kelly, who was close with the Connolly family and actually moved into their home in the days after the disappearance, supposedly to support Bernadette's grieving father. He volunteered to read through the sympathy letters the family received and report anything unusual to police, framed as helping out a man with poor eyesight. Around this time, he also told the family something odd, that he'd seen a car doing a strange U-turn outside their house late one night, and that he'd followed it in the dark toward a nearby bog before losing track of it in the fields. That bog is the exact place where Bernadette's body would be found months later, not long after becoming a suspect. Father Columba was quietly transferred to a parish in Botswana. He left without saying goodbye to the family and never contacted them again. Years later, cornered by a journalist during a visit home, he floated a bizarre theory that Irish security forces had killed Bernadette over a gun-running operation passing through the area, a claim a close friend of his later dismissed outright as nonsense, insisting Columba had been watching television with others the entire evening in question. The third name is Robert Reynolds, an Englishman traveling through the Sligo area around the time of the disappearance, later convicted of raping and attempting to murder a 9-year-old girl in a different Irish town, along with several other assaults on young girls across the country in the years that followed. A witness reported seeing him driving down the very lane Bernadette vanished from, behind the wheel of a dark car matching the description other witnesses gave that day. A renewed investigation into Reynolds in 2011 came back inconclusive, and by then, he'd already been questioned and released once before. Nobody has ever been charged. Bernadette Connolly's murder remains, to this day, completely unsolved. Rio Boyd was 21 years old, living in Spanaway, Washington with her father, Brian, and his family. Her parents had split when she was young, and she spent most of her childhood bouncing between 2 households, her mother Christie's home in Oregon and her father's place in Washington. Her name, fittingly, came from the Duran Duran song her mother loved. Rio's life hadn't been an easy one, and I think it's worth telling you about her before I get into what happened. As a young child, she was described as happy, artistic, and creative, someone who loved being outdoors, running through the local forest, and fishing with her cousins. She struggled in school with ADHD, and even after being diagnosed and put on medication, certain family members kept telling her she didn't really need it, which led her to stop taking it on and off throughout her life. After being bullied at a new school she transferred to, she eventually dropped out altogether. Not long after, she fell in with a rougher crowd drinking, experimenting with pills, partying most nights, spending her days mostly babysitting her younger cousins in between. At one point, she and a friend took a large dose of an over-the-counter cough medication together. Her friend ended up hallucinating badly enough to be rushed to the hospital. Rio wasn't affected the same way, but it scared her mother enough that Christy made a decision. She moved Rio out to her father's house entirely, hoping the distance from her old friend group would help her get clean. It didn't really work out that way. Rio's stepsister turned out to be just as wild, and Rio kept partying with a new circle out there instead. During one visit back to her mother's house, things escalated badly. Rio didn't get along with her mother's new partner, and at one point started using drugs right in front of Christy. During an argument, Rio, reportedly under the influence, pulled a knife and threatened her mother's partner, telling him to never come between her and her mother again before driving the blade into a table. Nobody was physically hurt, but it was enough that Christy and her partner took out a restraining order against Rio, her own daughter. Christy eventually dropped it herself, unable to bear the thought that Rio might need her one day and she wouldn't legally be allowed to help. In the end, Rio moved back in with her father for good, likely to stay closer to her current friends. But in the months before she disappeared, there were real signs Rio was starting to turn a corner. She'd taken up glass blowing and had a genuine talent for it. Her father said she was seriously considering a career as an artist, someone with a real passion for drawing. He remembers her dry sense of humor most, and the way she used to light up a room the moment she walked into it. Now, a few days before she vanished, Rio told her mother something that, looking back, is hard to read as anything but a warning sign. She said she felt like she was being watched, that she felt like she was going to get jumped. She described leaving a local convenience store recently and noticing a group of men parked in a truck staring at her in a way that gave her, in her own words, a really bad feeling. She told her mother she thought someone was following her. Christy passed the concern along to Brian, but he brushed it off, telling her Rio was probably just imagining things. On October 17, 2022, Rio and her father argued that morning over his phone, which he wanted for himself, while he was, as it was put, trying to get with some girl. Rio didn't own a phone of her own at the time, and a replacement had just arrived in the mail that day, paid for by her mother. Rio called Christy first thing to talk it over. She sounded completely normal on the call and told her mom she was planning to visit some friends later that day. Throughout the afternoon, Christy sent her a few texts, checking in and chatting about the new phone. When Rio stopped responding to multiple messages, her mother started to genuinely worry. Around 6 that evening, Rio left the mobile home she shared with her father on Field Road in Spanaway, telling him she was heading to a friend's place nearby. She took her brand new phone with her. She left her keys, her ID, and her wallet behind at the house. She never made it to her friend's home. 2 days later, that new phone rang, and rang until a stranger finally picked it up, a neighbor out walking his dog, who'd found it lying on the ground roughly 400 feet from the Boyd house, right around the 400 block of Field Road. He ran over, picked it up out of instinct, and answered the call from Brian, who was confused to hear a man's voice instead of his daughter's. Rio's father rushed straight to the location. There was nothing else there. No sign of a struggle, no belongings scattered, no clue at all beyond the phone itself lying in the grass. Her father initially wasn't too alarmed, assuming she'd come home eventually, the way she sometimes did after a rough patch. Christy kept pushing him to report her missing right away. When Rio still hadn't come home, he finally did. Her uncle Chad later said it wasn't like Rio to disappear without telling anyone, and that she'd never willingly leave behind her pit bull, Roscoe, a dog she adored and always made sure was cared for. Police reviewed nearby surveillance footage covering a 2-day window around the time she vanished and analyzed camera footage from a building near where the phone was found. Nothing useful ever turned up. Investigators have said publicly that they don't believe the man who found her phone had anything to do with her disappearance. Her own phone was handed over for forensic examination, though it's never been made clear what, if anything, was found on it. Rio's mother has her own theory about who might be responsible, involving a man connected to her father's workplace who she claims supplied Rio with drugs and got her addicted, and who allegedly also pressured Rio for sexual favors, including a threesome with his wife. Nothing has ever been proven either way, and the strain of the investigation reportedly caused a rift between Rio's parents, who had initially been searching for her together. Here's what I keep coming back to with this one. Just days before she vanished, Rio was actively telling people she felt unsafe. She wasn't vague about it. Either she named a specific place, a specific feeling, a specific group of men in a truck who made her uneasy enough to mention it to her mother from another state, and the one person closest to her physically, her own father, dismissed it. I can't tell you whether that feeling had anything to do with what actually happened to her, but it's the kind of detail that true crime investigators and armchair researchers alike keep coming back to. Because it's rare for a missing person to leave behind such a direct, specific warning right before disappearing. The investigation has continued in the years since, though slowly. Christy has spoken publicly more than once, including in podcast interviews, trying to keep her daughter's case in the public eye, the way so many families of missing adults are forced to do once the initial media attention fades. Rio doesn't fit the profile that usually gets sustained national coverage. She was 21, had a documented history of drug use and instability, and had run into trouble with the law before. Cases like hers tend to get quietly filed away as runaways unless family members keep pushing, which is exactly what Christy has continued to do. Rio was initially treated by police as a runaway. She's now classified as an endangered missing person. She's a white woman, 5'6", with brown hair, brown eyes, a scar on her left forearm, and a small mole above her upper lip, her ears pierced. She was last seen wearing blue jeans and possibly a black Seattle Seahawks jacket. If she's still alive today, she'd be about 25 years old. She has never been found. In Hannibal, Missouri, a town most famous for being the childhood home of Mark Twain. This time, 3 boys went missing at once, and it started, like so many childhood tragedies do, with a place they'd been warned to stay away from. Brothers Billy and Joey Hogue, 11 and 12 years old, had discovered a place called Murphy's Cave near a highway construction site. Joey, the more serious of the two, kept a meticulous journal every night, signing it amateur astronomer Joel Hogue, and dreamed of becoming the first man on the moon. Billy was the opposite, mischievous and funny, the kind of kid who followed his older brother into every scheme without a second thought. A worker at the site spotted them exploring the cave and told them to clear out. It was dangerous, he said, but nobody actually took any real steps to stop other kids from wandering back in. The very next day, the boys snuck out with 2 friends and returned to the cave anyway. They came home that night covered head to toe in red clay mud, and their mother, Helen, scrubbed their clothes clean and told them in no uncertain terms that they were never to go back there again. The next day, May 10th, their parents left the house to run an errand at the local meat market, leaving Billy and Joey's older siblings, 15-year-old Tim and 16-year-old Dee Dee, among 9 children total in the Hogue household, in charge of watching them. Dee Dee remembers telling the boys plainly to stay in the yard. Billy didn't even answer her. At some point that afternoon, the 2 of them slipped out again, this time taking a flashlight, a homemade lantern, and a shovel with them, heading straight back to Murphy's Cave. Over the course of the afternoon, they were seen with several friends, including 14-year-old Craig Dowell, a classmate who wasn't exactly a close friend, more of a familiar face from school who happened to tag along that day. Craig's mother would later describe him as crazy about bicycles. Another friend, 11-year-old Greg Henderson, was invited to join them, but couldn't some accounts say he was called in for dinner. Others say he was grounded and confined to his room that day, a small detail that may have saved his life. The timeline of that afternoon gets blurry fast. Different witnesses place the boys in different spots at different times, sometimes together, sometimes apart, spotted by a teenage girl, a teacher, even a school janitor near a cliff called Lover's Leap, depending on which account you read. What's agreed on is that they were seen entering the cave around 4:35 in the afternoon and spotted around town at various points over the following 40 minutes. After 5:15 p.m. that day, nobody ever saw any of them again. Around that same time, a friend stopped by the Hogue house looking for the boys. Their parents, who'd just returned from the market, said they weren't home and asked the friend to send them straight back if he ran into them. When Billy and Joey still weren't home by 5:45, their older brother Tim went looking for them himself. At the cave, some of the boys' friends told him they'd seen Billy, Joey, and Craig go inside earlier that day. Tim went in to check. He found absolutely nothing. By 6:30 that evening, their mother had called the police. That same day, construction work near the cave had triggered a partial collapse somewhere inside it. Investigators feared the worst almost immediately, that the boys might have been trapped inside when it happened, somewhere rescuers simply couldn't reach. What followed was one of the largest search operations the region had ever seen. Over 200 cave explorers, both professionals and amateurs, came in from 3 different states. Emergency squads, National Guard units, and civil defense workers joined the effort. Search dogs were brought in from as far as St. Louis, though their trail ran cold at the base of a rockfall deep inside the cave. Even a small family dog from the neighborhood was brought in to help, without success. Some passages were so narrow that only the smallest searchers, some weighing under 100 pounds, could squeeze through it all. And the construction work kept uncovering new tunnel entrances as the days dragged on, turning the whole system into what one search team member described as an actual underground labyrinth. The Hoag family stayed at the site through the entire search, with Helen climbing the surrounding hills herself, watching and waiting through the long day and night hours, pleading with searchers to expand into other caves nearby. The only physical clue ever recovered in the entire search was a single sock, believed to belong to Craig, found abandoned in a nearby quarry alongside a reddish substance investigators suspected was blood. After days of exhaustive searching, nothing more was ever found. No bodies, no remains, no indication